Hello, everybody, and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin. Okay, end the pregnant pause for comical effect. I'm supposed to have someone jumping in and saying, I'm Connor, but he went off and had a baby, the nerve of him, and now he has to take care of that baby. So he was unable to make it for this podcast, but he's hopefully going to be with us for the rest of the podcast when we do the group by group preview. This one is a preliminary podcast for the Gold Cup 2021. And our intention here is to give some information that'll better help understand what we talk about in the group by group previews. And really, we're doing this to avoid repeating information every time we bring it up. So, for example, the regional tournament was named the Concacaf Championship from 1963 to 1989, and the Gold Cup from 1991 until the present. And though we will repeat that sometimes when we're discussing the groups, we don't want to kind of feel that we have to explain every time, because that would be redundant. To specify it every time we mention the CONCACAF Championship. So this podcast is to kind of put things in their context and discuss some other things that we want to do in a preliminary podcast. We also think it's interesting to understand things like the difference between FIFA and ELO rankings and the way the competition has changed over the years. So with that in mind, let's get down to business. In this episode, we will introduce the purpose of our podcast. We'll talk about the formats we are using, because the episodes are designed to suit both YouTube watchers and podcast listeners. We're going to introduce ourselves, the hosts, and then the main part of the podcast is a history of the CONCACAF regional tournament. And I've divided that into 9 sections. So it's not only the history, but it talks about the format and some of the new changes, which are a bit hard to wrap our heads around. The CONCACAF Nation League and how that works and how it acts as a qualifier for the Gold Cup. We'll also talk about qualification for this 2021 Cup, especially the back door available to some teams, because like the Euro 2020, there was a back door available, but it was a bit complex to understand how it worked. So we'll also introduce some other relevant tournaments that CONCACAF is involved with, the Confederations Cup and the South American Cup, the Copa America, which they're sometimes involved with. And we'll discuss FIFA and ELO rankings, what's the difference between them. And finally, some of the terms we use in our discussions in the group by group discussions. So all of that to get through. I will just mention our names here. This is the International Soccer Preview, and our kind of company name, if you will, is Soccer Files Canada, sometimes just Soccer Files. And you can look us up under that name, under International Soccer Preview, or Soccer Files with a PH, or Soccer Files Canada. We actually have done a few podcasts so far. We did a preview of the Euro 2020 groups, and we did a preview of the Copa America 2021 groups. And our intention is to preview not only tournaments, but if possible, we're going to preview qualifying tournaments. So, for example, both CONCACAF, the North and Central American region, and the Asian region are both beginning the last stage of their World Cup qualifying. So we're going to try to preview those teams also. All right, well, let's start with an introduction to our podcast. By what right do we have to speak about international soccer? Well, none really. I've always had international soccer as a hobby. And around 2006, I started making files on the teams, tournaments, and players. Actually, I started earlier than that, and it was on paper. I was in South Korea for the 2002 World Cup, not as a kind of not as a fan of soccer, but I actually lived there and enjoyed that. I kind of started keeping records there, and it moved to computer in 2006. It's these files actually that I started making that play into the name, and most of the graphics that we show on the videocast come from these files I've been keeping. Keeping up with them as tournaments came and went became a bit of an obsession. And in I think it was 2019, I was looking for a preview podcast myself for the Asian Cup, and I couldn't find one. I think it was the same for the 2018 World Cup, if I recall. I found some that were focused on one national team. And most of the ones I've listened to kind of focus on the big teams, but don't focus on the smaller teams or the smaller details. So I thought it would be interesting to do that. I have the passion for soccer, and I have the files with the information. So that is the right I claim to be doing this podcast. Now we are doing a kind of a video cast and an audio cast, but our graphics are fairly primitive, and really they're not that important because we want to make it an audio cast as well. So the graphics are just very simple, and they're not really necessary for following along. They just make it a little bit easier. Those of you who wish to follow along with the podcast, though, most of the graphics that we have, we'll actually just be talking about those things. So it's not really necessary to see the graphics. Now let's move on to the introduction of ourselves. I'm Kevin. When people ask where I'm from, or I understand I have a slight accent, where that's from, I have trouble answering that question. My parents were Irish. They moved to Chepstow and then Cardiff in Wales. Chepstow is a small town on the Welsh side of the border with England. And while my parents went to a Welsh hospital, a hospital in Wales for my older sisters, they went to an English hospital for me and my brother. So I'm a bit English too, having been born there technically. But I mostly consider myself a Canadian and an Irish person. My family moved to Canada when I was 10, and I grew up here. I went to the University of Alberta to get a degree in education, and then I was a teacher for 5 years in a small town called Edson, which is halfway between here in Edmonton, where we're coming from, and the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains is about 4 hours from here. Edson is halfway. I really love teaching, but I didn't want to be in a small town forever. So I decided around the time I was 30 to travel a little bit. Now, I prefer to live somewhere rather than visit somewhere. So I planned to stay in Asia for a year or two, but I ended up staying at 15, ending up somewhat unexpectedly in South Korea. Part of the reason for staying there was because I suspected the 2002 World Cup would be there. It ended up being shared with Japan, but it was there also. And it was, and my brother came over to watch it with me. My brother is Connor's father. And who knows, down the road, he may also appear on the podcast. It was good to be able to get around South Korea by ourselves because I was familiar with the place, having lived there 6 years by then. And I ended up staying much longer than expected because I met my wife there and ended up having 2 daughters with her. And we kind of wanted our daughters to grow up in Korea and have that side to their culture. So we delayed coming back to Canada. I kind of always knew I would in the future, but we came back to Canada in 2010. So I was in South Korea for around 15 years. I taught English as a second language both in South Korea and when I got back at the University of Alberta. And now I'm a teacher in the public school system. But all the while, I've been keeping up with my files as best as I could. Now would be the time for Connor to pop in and introduce himself. So I will take over that and just give a quick introduction of Connor. He is my nephew. He was born and raised in Edmonton. Edmonton is a city in the province of Alberta, and Alberta's a province of Canada. He's been playing and following soccer as long as he can remember. It's also a passion for him, bordering on an obsession. And some of his earliest memories rotate around soccer. He remembers the 1998 World Cup in France, for example, and I think he would have been around 8 years old at that time. He stayed in touch with me when I was in South Korea, and that was kind of what we talked about mostly. He also went to the University of Alberta and got a degree in political science. And during that time, he studied for a year in Wales, getting back to his roots in a way. He studied at Swansea University, and during that time followed his beloved Cardiff City, attending as many games, both home and away, as he could. He plays competitive soccer here in Edmonton and continues to follow soccer closely. Particularly, we follow the English Premier League and Championship, but we've always paid special attention to international matches, qualifiers, and tournaments. Now, Connor is not here today because he recently had a baby, so a big congratulations to him. And anyone who's had a newborn infant knows how preoccupying that can be. So he doesn't have great control of his schedule, but he's going to try his best to do the group-by-group podcasts with me. So if he happens to say something insightful or one of his predictions comes true, don't be surprised if he stuffs a soccer ball under his shirt and runs around the room in celebration. We'll just have to be a little patient with that. Okay, now let's get down to our main business, which is the history of the Concacaf tournament. Oops, I've been a bit behind on my graphics for the people following on YouTube, but there it kind of illustrates that the graphics are not much to speak about. They're really just kind of title pages. Now, because this section turned out to be a bit long, I've divided it into 9 parts. So for the audio listeners, I'll announce each part before, and for the video listeners, video watchers, that's on the title page graphic. Just give me a moment here to clear my throat. Okay, so part 1, we're going to look at the history of the CONCACAF regional tournament and a bit of history before CONCACAF. So part 1 is before CONCACAF. Before CONCACAF, the region was divided into 2 separate regions. The North American zone consisted of Mexico, Canada, USA, and interestingly, Cuba. They played only 2 tournaments in 1947 and 1949. Oddly, though, they were briefly reformed for 2 tournaments in 1990 and 1991. I didn't even know this. I just found it in the research for this podcast. The other group in the region was the CCCF. I won't get into what that means because, frankly, it doesn't matter that much. What is important is it consisted of some Central American and Caribbean teams. So they actually had 10 tournaments between 1941 and 1961, and Costa Rica won 7 of those 10 tournaments. That's usually not considered that much in the record. I might research it a bit later in time, but really I've understood that CONCACAF kind of begins in 1963 with the beginning of the CONCACAF tournament. So let's move on to part 2. Part 2, the 3 zones of CONCACAF. Okay, Concacaf was formed in 1961, and it's now made up of 41 members. Those members are divided into 3 zones. The North American zone, consisting of Canada, USA, and Mexico. The Central American zone, which is made up of 7 countries. And the Caribbean zone, which makes up the rest, which would be about 30 countries. The Caribbean zone is very diverse and includes Suriname and Guyana, which are actually on the South American continent. French Guiana is also part of it. That's also on the South American continent. And also there's Martinique and Guadeloupe, who, along with French Guiana, are not countries, but they are called overseas departments of France. And I understand that to be akin to provinces of France. In fact, they do use, at least Martinique, I know for sure, uses the euro, and they're part of the EU. I'm assuming that's true for Guadeloupe and French Guiana too. Yes, and Cuba also has moved from the North American zone in the 1940s, well, also in the 1990s with those 2 tournaments. Cuba is now firmly part of the Caribbean zone, having moved at some point from the North American zone. Moving on to part 3, the CONCACAF Championship, 1963 to 89, the round-robin format and World Cup qualification from 1970 to 1989. The regional competition, the regional competition was called the CONCACAF Championship. That started in 1963 and is basically viewed as the beginning of the regional tournament. Again, I would have to research those older tournaments, but we understand it to be beginning in 1963, which is actually when most regions, Europe and Africa, started having regional tournaments. The CONCACAF Championship was played every 2 years until 1971, and then every 4 years from 1973. So 10 teams entered the inaugural competition in 1963. Qualifying knocked out just 1 team that year, and the other 9 entered a group stage and a final round. Okay, the winner, though, was not decided by knockout games. Rather, it was a round-robin competition where each team played the other, and then the team at the top of the table was declared the champion that year. But only in 1963 was there a group stage and a final round-robin. From 1965, the final stage grew from 4 teams in 1963 to 6 teams in 1965 onwards. And the tournament was just the final stage round robin among those 6 teams. From 1973 to 1989, it also became the qualifying tournament for the World Cup, which also lasted until 1989. So that means the top finishers in that round robin group qualified for the World Cup. Part 4. Oh, again, I'm off on my graphics. There is part 3 for you viewers. Part 4. Part 4, the Gold Cup. From 1991 until present times, it actually has grown from 8 teams. It was 8 teams from 1991 to 98, grew to 12 teams from 2000 to 2017, and in 2019 it became 16 teams. So this 2021 tournament will be the second time 16 teams are involved. And I'm going to talk a little bit about invited guests. Qatar has been invited to the 2021 Cup, but they have had many people invited in previous years. Many countries in previous years. So we'll talk a little bit about that. In 1991, the competition was rebranded into the Gold Cup, and it was separated from World Cup qualification. The USA would be the host or co-host every time, and the competition was held every 2 years. Actually, that didn't hold true, as there were 3 years in between 1993 and the 1996 editions, and then they had editions in 2002 and 2003. But generally, it has been every 2 years on odd-numbered years. So the tournament was made up of 8 teams from 1991, became 12 teams in 2000, as I've said, and the format has always been a group stage and a knockout finals, just like most tournaments. So no more round robin in the Concacaf zone. The quarterfinal was introduced in 2000 when it became a 12-team tournament, and that remained when it became a 16-team tournament. So basically, the top 2 teams in the 16-team group will qualify for the quarterfinals, and then it'll be a knockout down to the semifinals and the final. Part 5, the 3 zones of CONCACAF and qualifying. Okay, qualification for the Gold Cup was based on the 3 zones, so that kind of follows the CONCACAF Championship, although the CONCACAF Championship was a bit complex, and sometimes it followed the 3 zones, sometimes it didn't. Anyway, the 3 zones are the North American zone, so now it's Mexico, USA, and Canada alone, and they receive automatic qualification. Okay, and the Central American zone competed in the UNCAF Nations Cup, which in 2011 was rebranded into the Copa Centroamericana. So you might hear both names, and they might not accurately reflect the years, but either the UNCAF Nations Cup or the Copa Centroamericana is the 7 teams in Central America, and generally 2 to 4 of those went on to qualify for the Gold Cup. Finally, the Caribbean zone. The Caribbean zone competed in the Caribbean Cup from 1991 to 2017. Those are the same dates for the UNCAF Nations Cup, beginning in 1991 and ending in 2017. And from 1996 to 2005, guests from outside of CONCACAF were invited and included South American, Asian, and even an African team, South Africa, being invited to one of those tournaments. The 2019 reintroduces this, with Qatar appearing as a guest nation. I'm not sure if that'll continue into the future, but Qatar's invitation here does represent a tradition that was abandoned in 2005 and reintroduced in 2021. Part 6, the Confederations Cup. All right, the winner of the Gold Cup went on to represent CONCACAF at the Confederations Cup. The Confederations Cup ultimately became a dress rehearsal for the World Cup, and it was hosted by the host of the World Cup, hosted 1 year before the World Cup took place. And it was an 8-team tournament, and it consisted of the host, the previous World Cup champions, and the winners of the 6 regional cups in the world. So that would be the winner of the Euro Cup, the winner of the South American Cup, the Copa America, the winner of the Gold Cup in CONCACAF, the winners of the Asian and African Cups, and the winner of the OFC Nations Cup in Oceania. Okay, and then those 8 teams would presumably play for champions of the world. That cup came to an end in 2017, but you can see a bit of a problem here with the World Cup. Sorry, with the Gold Cup taking place every 2 years and the Confederations Cup taking place every 4 years. Who would represent Concacaf? If there were 2 separate winners. So sometimes there weren't. It was generally Mexico who represented CONCACAF. But in the case where there were 2 winners, they had a playoff. So I believe in 2017, USA and Mexico played off for their position in the Confederations Cup, Mexico winning that. Part 7, the CONCACAF Nations League. The Nations League technically began in 2019-20. That was the inaugural season. But in 2018 and 19, there was a placement round. So that was almost acting like a qualifier for the first season in 2019 and 20. So I'll just go back to the beginning here. In 2017, the last UNCAF Nations Cup and Caribbean Cups were played because this was no longer qualification for the Gold Cup. Rather, the CONCACAF Nations League would decide the entrance to the Gold Cup. As I said, the first edition would be 2019-20, and the placement tournament would decide which teams would go into League A, League B, and League C. In that placement tournament in 2018 and 19, teams played 4 games, and they were placed on a large table consisting of all CONCACAF teams, except for the top 6, who were automatically placed in League A. The large table then also decided who would qualify for the 2019 Gold Cup. So basically, on this large table, the top 6 teams would qualify for the League A and also qualify for the Gold Cup. And the teams placing 7th to 10th would go into League B, but would qualify for the Gold Cup. And that's how the entrants were decided for the 2019 Gold Cup. Again, the top 6 received automatic qualification, both into League A and the Gold Cup. Okay, Part 8, the CONCACAF Nations League format. Leagues A, B, and C. The 2019-20 CONCACAF Nations League consisted of groups of 3 or 4 teams. League A had 3 teams in each group, League B had 4, and then League C had a mixture of 3 or 4. The winner of each group would be promoted upward, and the loser would be relegated downwards to the upper or lower league for the following season. Now, since there is nowhere up from League A, the 4 winners of the groups would have a mini tournament to decide the champion of the season, if you will. And of course, the losers of League C simply remain in League C because there's nowhere down to go. Okay, and in 2019 and 20, the 4 winners were Mexico, USA, Honduras, and Costa Rica. So they played a semi-final and a final kind of mini tournament to decide the champions for the first season, and that turned out to be the United States. Oh my God, I think I got to check. I'm confused as to whether it's the United States or Mexico. I'll get back to you on that. I think it was the United States. How embarrassing. Part 9, the CONCACAF Nations League format and Gold Cup qualification, including the back door in 2021. Okay, so the Nations League also acts as qualification for the Gold Cup. Now, this is a little bit tricky. So I'm going to kind of explain carefully. The first and second place finishers in League A qualify automatically. I'll repeat that. The first and second place finishers in League A qualify automatically for the Gold Cup. That fills 8 of the 16 slots available. Also, the winners of League B qualify. So that's 4 more teams. The winners of League B qualify, which fills 12 of the 16 slots. Now, the losers of League A and the second place finishers of League B and the winners of League C enter 2 rounds of playoffs. So I'll repeat that. That's 4 teams who were the winners of League B. Oh my God. 4 teams who were the second place finishers of League B. Oh my goodness. I'm getting confused. Okay, I'm going to go back to these playoff teams. The playoff teams are the 4 teams who were the losers of League A, the second place finishers of League B, and the winners of League C. They enter 2 rounds of playoffs. So that's 4 teams in each group. And they play off. They're reduced from 12 to 6 in the first round. And then they're reduced from 6 to 3 in the second round. Those 3 teams bring the total of the Gold Cup to 15 teams. So we have 12 teams plus those 3 teams. Those 3 teams in 2021 were Trinidad and Tobago and Haiti and Guadeloupe, who had a fantastic playoff with Guatemala, winning 11-10 on penalties. There's 1 more slot available if you're following the math here. And the 16th team, at least in 2021, is the invited guest, which is Qatar. And I do believe I have heard that Qatar is also the invited guest in 2023, but don't quote me on that because I would need to verify that. So that is the Gold Cup qualification, including the back door. And sorry if I was a little confusing there. But let's move on. Now, we've finished the Concacaf history, but I just want to say a quick word on the Copa America, because Concacaf teams have often been invited to Copa America. This is largely because there are 10 teams in the South American region, and they need 12 teams to structure the groups. So this has often been Mexico, who have participated regularly. Less often, USA has been one of the guests, and various other CONCACAF countries like Costa Rica and Honduras have taken part in 1 or 2 tournaments. In 2016, Copa America celebrated its centenario edition, or the 100-year anniversary. Oddly, it was hosted by the USA. They wanted 16 teams for that. So the 10 teams of South America needed 6 CONCACAF teams, and Mexico and USA were automatically granted a position. Also, the winner of the 2014 UNCAF Nations Cup and the 2014 Caribbean Cup received a spot. And then the other 2 spots were decided according to a playoff among the top finishers in the 2015 World Cup. So there we have some good kind of overlap between South America and North America. And some people think that they should, or they might, or they will actually join into one confederation down the road. But that's quite a complex question, and I think it's not going to happen soon. although it seems like it would be a good idea ultimately. Okay, now let's move on to a discussion of FIFA and ELO rankings. What does that mean? So the FIFA and ELO rankings are two different systems for ranking the strength of teams. Both are a formula-based system, or a kind of an algorithm, which awards points based on actual performance. And they take into account such as the relative strength of the opponent, the occasion of the match. So it would be less points if it's a friendly, but more points if it's a regional cup final, for example. The ELO system, I sometimes call it ELO, but I think it's supposed to be called ELO, was developed by a Hungarian mathematician called Arpad Elo, and it was predominantly used in chess, but it was adapted to soccer in 1997. FIFA had their own world ranking system since 1993, and the current FIFA world ranking system is actually based on a modified version of the ELO system. It's undergone a few changes because, in fact, the FIFA ranking system has been kind of controversial. Generally, there were criticisms that it didn't accurately represent the relative strength of teams, and that criticism is still out there, which is why Connor and I actually rely on the ELO system more. But the FIFA system was once again revamped in 2018, and ultimately the difference is that the FIFA system is based on a shorter time frame, whereas the ELO system is based on a longer time frame. And ultimately, that's why we like the ELO system more. The FIFA system is used to determine seedings for FIFA tournament, such as World Cup qualifying. However, the ELO ranking system has been proven to have a better predictive capacity. And as I said, we find it to be more accurate. FIFA doesn't take into account home or away games. They also don't take into account the margin of victory, which is winning by 1 goal compared to winning by 4 goals. ELO does take those things into account. And basically, we find the ELO system is less volatile compared to the FIFA rankings, which can jump up and down quite radically. And again, that's because it's based on a shorter sample of recent results. Okay, we're going to move on now to talk about some of the terminology that we use. So we kind of do, I must admit, kind of interchange some of these words, but generally we're trying to stick to this. We talk about we talk about head-to-head results when we're talking about teams, and we want to specify that head-to-head results only takes into account competitive fixtures only, such as games in qualifying and in tournaments. We don't use friendlies in our head-to-head or non-official tournaments when we look at the head-to-head of teams. Campaign, the word campaign. Campaign technically refers to the entire run of the team in any given tournament. It includes qualifying, and if successful, also includes the tournament itself. So we should say France won their 2018 World Cup campaign, which implies that they successfully qualified and passed the group stage and won all the games after the group stage. However, campaign is sometimes used just for qualifying. So Ghana's successful 2006 World Cup campaign might mean that they reached the final tournament. Okay, and the word tournament takes us to a clarification we want to make. Tournament refers to the group stage and the final stage, and is usually hosted by a country. It rarely includes the qualifying games. The finals or the cup are common synonyms for tournament. So we'll talk about the 2021 Gold Cup tournament, and we could equally use the 2021 Gold Cup finals or just the 2021 Gold Cup. The finals often refer to the part of the tournament. The finals often refer to the tournament itself, as in not the qualifying, but the finals, whereas the final stages specifically refers to the games after the group stage. Okay, the term qualifying or qualification, or its collocations in qualifying or qualifying campaign or qualification record, refers to the process that a team had to undergo to successfully reach the cup. This is usually, nowadays, and in Europe at least, groups of 5 or 7 teams that play each other home and away. It may include a playoff round. For example, the top 2 finishers in the group may advance directly to the tournament, where the third place qualifier advances to a playoff with the third place finisher from another group. Only the winner of that home and away set advances to the cup. In the past, there have been some preliminary rounds or more than one round of qualifying, but that is generally going out of fashion. No, actually, it isn't for the World Cup. There may be several rounds. So for the 2022 World Cup, there was round 1, which all of the teams are supposed to be involved in, and then a further reducing round 2, and for the Concacaf region, the final round, which was called the Hex because there were 6 teams, and now is undergoing a name change. I hope they go with Oka, which is 8 teams. That's the final round. Anyway, all of those rounds, no matter what it is, will be considered under the term qualifying, whatever they need to do to reach the cup. Finally, I'm going to introduce a little term of my own. In writing my soccer files, I use the term bested because there doesn't seem a proper word that describes a certain result in a home and away set. So bested occurs where one team ties in one leg and wins in the other. So, for example, we can say Canada bested USA in 1974 World Cup qualifying. That would mean Canada tied one leg, which they did, 2-2 in fact, and they won the other leg. 3-2 is the truth, and woohoo! You can see why I'm kind of using this example as a Canadian. Okay, the term bested doesn't denote whether the tie was at home or away. We can also use it in the passive to say, for example, USA was bested by Canada in the 1974 World Cup qualifying, which would mean that one game was tied and the other one was lost. Okay, and we'll just take a quick look at the venues for the 2021 Gold Cup, and we can see that they are in various cities around America, generally in the south part of the south part of the United States. And the reason for that is that they can draw a lot of fans from Central American teams in particular. So there are a lot of Mexicans who show up to games for Mexico, and they have a lot of people from Honduras and El Salvador and stuff like that. So the games usually are crowded and noisy. They're not like away games at all, even though they technically are away games. And that is why the USA has often been hosting, for example, the 2016 Copa America, because there were lots of South Americans, people living in the United States who showed up as fans for the game. Okay, well, that brings us to the conclusion of this preliminary podcast. As I said at the beginning, we are planning not only to preview final tournaments, but hopefully to preview qualification tournaments, because we think that makes us a bit different than other podcasts or other the soccer shows. We intend to focus on the smaller things and the details. We will do the big tournaments, of course, but we think the details and the focus on smaller countries is what's really needed, and that was the purpose of our podcast. So thank you for listening, and we will see you in Group A, where we preview the first group, and in the subsequent 4 groups. Thank you very much for listening, and bye-bye.